It's got some goobers on it. Is that molly grease? What is that? What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. So here before me we have my BBS02 bike. So this is one of the first e-bikes that I built. I built it back in, I want to say 2021 is when I built this. Probably like summer, fall 2021. So it's got the 750 watt BAFANG BBS02 mid-drive on it. And I had a lot of fun with this bike, but I wanted to try one of these motors on a high voltage with the gears in the back on the bike still, where we can shift through the gears on high voltage and try that out. And so I was thinking that the BBS02 bike, this is a good bike to do that with, because I barely ever use it anymore, and which is kind of a shame, because I do like the BBS02. It's a great motor. The price is incredible. I mean, you can get that whole kit, the whole BBS02 kit, you know, for like, when there's a good sale on AliExpress, you can get the whole kit for like $350. Right, so that includes everything that you need except for the battery and the bike, right? So the kit itself, like $350, $400 maybe for this mid-drive, and it's got the controller built into it. Now, if you want to upgrade it to a higher voltage, you're going to have to buy a better controller that supports higher voltage. But, you know, so I've already got this. This motor's great. It's economical. It's very cheap. You know, if anything goes wrong with it, it's easy to open up and work on. The parts are easy and affordable to replace. So I want to get this thing on 72 volts with a Phaserunner, like I did with my BBS HD, the high voltage BBS HD. So, just gonna kind of working on this bike. I made a video about how I put a riv nut in here, and I'm gonna use a riv nut and a bolt, and along with that stabilizer bar, kind of like that torque arm that goes on here to hold it in when I put all this stuff back together. But first, I'm going to take this motor off the bike. I'm going to look inside of it. I haven't maintained this motor or done anything inside of it ever, other than just removing the plastic cover and putting a little bit of grease in there one time. So I'm going to take this motor off the bike. We're going to snip all the zip ties, get all of the wires disconnected and everything. I'm going to take this motor off the bike, and then we're going to kind of break it down, open it up, see what's going on inside. We are going to disconnect the stock controller, and I'm going to put a different cover on here. We're going to make a wiring harness inside of here so that we can wire this motor, the BBS02. We're going to wire the motor to a different controller, and we're going to have to create a wiring harness for that. And then, so once I get this motor overhauled, we get it re-greased, we get it rewired, I'll get it back onto the bike, and then we'll get the other controller and the Cycle Analyst and all that stuff. We'll get all that stuff onto this bike, and we'll get it on 72 volts and see how that goes. And so for this project, I want to try and hook up the pedal assist sensor inside of the motor to my Cycle Analyst so that I can use pedal assist. That's something that I did not do on my high voltage BBS HD bike. So I'm going to try to hook up the pedal assist sensor. I'm also going to try and hook up the shift sensor to the brake cutoffs on my Cycle Analyst. So that'll be another little project. We're going to make sure that there's a thermistor inside of the motor in a good spot. I'm going to glue one onto the coils. So we're going to be digging around inside this motor for a little bit here, getting this thing overhauled and prepared for 72 volts. So I'm going to get this thing off the bike, get all these zip ties off, and then we're going to work on this thing at my desk. Alright guys, so I got the motor off the bike. It's right here in front of me on top of this towel. Just going to take a minute to wipe this thing off because this motor has been in use for several years. As you can see, it is not a new motor. Oh wow! GoPro is letting me preview this video while I'm filming it. That's amazing. Did they update the software or something? That's incredible. Okay. Color me surprised. Alright, so back to this. So I'm going to wipe this thing down before we start fondling it and working on it here. See this bearing right here is just full of dirt and debris that we're going to get off. Go around all this, get this off. And so what I'm going to do first is there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, what is it, 7? 2, 4, yeah, 7 So there's 7 Phillips screws, and this is actually a plastic cover. This cover right here that goes over this secondary reduction gear. So we're gonna take all these Phillips screws out of this plastic cover, and we're gonna take all these screws out. So now we have this cover unscrewed, and we should be able to lift this guy up and off. So let's put the motor just like, well, actually, I think I'm gonna lift this thing upside down so any like dirt just falls out and down and not into the motor. So let's do that. And then I'm gonna go like this. So see how there's like, we're gonna have to wipe that out a little bit because you can see dirt kind of gets in that cover, and yeah, so we'll have to wipe that out. But so what I'm doing here is I just want to get a little bit more grease in here. It comes with moly grease inside of it, and so moly grease is good for these steel gears, these metal gears. But what some people do is they put SHC 100, this Mobilith SHC 100 grease, and they just use that in the whole motor, right? But this stuff, it doesn't mix very well with the moly grease, so it's best to remove the old moly grease first if you're putting that stuff in there. So what I'm gonna do is we're gonna wipe out this cover, because I don't want any of that dirt and stuff going back into the motor when we put it back on. So let's just clean that out right now. Alright, so the BBS02, it's a little bit different than the BBS HD. Like when you take that cover off the HD, that secondary gear and all this stuff just comes out with the cover on the HD. It's a little bit different. But on this one, this whole thing like stays in here. And in order to get this out, it's like a different process that I'm not really familiar with. I've never done that. But what I have done before, and what I want to do right now, is we're just gonna take a little bit of this grease and just kind of smush it in around the edge of the teeth of this secondary reduction gear and this pinion gear. Now, ideally, of course, you know, you would take this whole gear out and clean it out thoroughly, get all of that moly grease out of there, and then put some of this grease in there. But, you know, this is like 80% of the results for 20% of the effort, and we're just gonna do this quick. So you can just kind of take some of this grease and then just kind of smush it in along the edge, those teeth, and just kind of keep spinning and smushing more in there. Okay, so we smushed a little bit of that grease in there, and I was just spinning it clockwise, and you can see as I'm spinning it, it's kind of pushing some grease out right here, and you can see this is like the black moly grease. So I'm gonna take that black grease, any of this black stuff, and I'm gonna try and take it out. So I'll just keep spinning this, and so all this grease is kind of black, and I'll take. Okay, so we got some grease in there, so I'm just gonna. Alright guys, so as you can see, when I spin this gear, the grease kind of gets pushed up and out this way when this pinion gear is interfacing with the reduction gear. And so the grease will kind of like build up right here and kind of like lube itself. But if you have this whole entire thing just completely caked and full of grease, there's going to be some pressure here, and like that grease isn't going to have anywhere to move around and stuff, right? So you don't need to overdo this, right? Just get some grease in there, spin it around, maybe get some of the old discolored grease out of there. But you don't need to overdo it so much that this whole thing is full of grease, or there will be some pressure happening inside of the motor, right? So this is good. I'm going to put this cover back on the motor. Get that guy going, and we can wipe this part off here. I'm just kind of spinning it. It does kind of feel, it feels greased up for sure, right? I can't tell if it's harder to spin or not. It definitely feels greased. But I guess my point is it is possible to over grease this, right? So just don't over grease it. I've seen some people that seem to believe that you can just, there's no such thing as over greasing it and just put as much as you can in there, but I don't think that's correct. Okay, so we got some grease in there, that's great. Let's move on to the rest of the motor. I gotta let my GoPro cool down for a minute. It's struggling. All right, so we got this secondary reduction gear all greased up. Now I'm gonna grab my Allens and we're gonna take the 3mm Allen, pop that guy out. So now we are going to pop the controller off of the BBS02. So that's these. So this is the controller right here. And it's got 3 M3 bolts. We're gonna have to loosen up. They could be full of some dirt or something, so just make sure that you're not stripping those out. All right, so let's get these bolts coming out of there. I love how I can see what I'm filming with the GoPro. This is truly revolutionary. At first they said it was only for the 12, but they must have retroactively made it for the 11 too, because I've got the GoPro Hero 11. Thanks, GoPro. That is like the first time that I think I've ever noticed GoPro improving. It was they improved the app. All right, so we're getting this last screw out of here. So we got all those M3 screws out of the controller. Now, let's see. So there's a gasket in between there, and you don't really want it like sticking. You don't want it to rip. So it looks like it's kind of stuck right here. So I'm gonna come in here. And this is an iFixit. It's like a little plastic pick kind of wedge thing. So the point of this is used for like when you're disassembling phones, to pry the case or like pry the screen off, like, so it's made so that it's not gonna scratch anything. It's plastic, but it's really good for getting in there. And you can buy these from ifixit.com. I think it's called a spudger. I don't know, I always forget what it's called. So I'm just gonna make sure this gasket is gonna come off in one piece and we're not ripping it up. So I'm gonna go around the whole controller housing, just make sure that gasket isn't stuck. Okay, so now let's see. When this thing's been on there for a while, it can be a little bit of a challenge to get it off. Ugh. So where's this stuck? I guess it's probably stuck down here still. Let's see. Once this thing's been on there for a while, it can be a little bit of a challenge. It might need some prying and some persuasion. Seems like it's still stuck right here. Man, why is this so difficult to get off of here? Oh my god. I still don't understand what this is stuck on here. Oh, I see. I think this plastic cover needs to come off because it's like, it's blocking this thing right here. So I guess on the O2, we want to leave this cover off until we get this controller out. I think that's what you gotta do. So alright, so I got those screws out. We're gonna take this cover off again. So does this come out now? Oh yeah, that's what I think that's what was stuck on. Okay. So you gotta take this cover off in order to get the controller out. So now we can go like this. Oh, and pull that out. Okay, so now you can see inside of there and what's going on there. So we got some silicone that's kind of stuck. Okay. Alright guys, we're back. GoPro overheated again. So right here, we've got a 4-pin JST connector for the pedal assist stuff. We're just gonna squeeze the little things. So I think you gotta squeeze and pull. Oh. Okay, so you squeeze this, I don't know if you can see this, but you squeeze this piece right here to lift that thing up, and then you gotta squeeze these two edges. There we go. So there is the 4-pin pedal assist sensor that we just disconnected from the stock controller. So let's carry on. So we've got our 3 phase wires, have like a bullet connector. So I'm just gonna pull those phase connectors apart here. Oh, to disconnect them. Oh, all right. And then finally we have the kind of the main, this main, what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, interesting. So this, I don't think that this motor has a temperature sensor in it. Very interesting. Okay, so I'm gonna have to do this one a little bit different than the BBS HD, because it doesn't, the BBS HD, this connector, it's 6 pins, and then there's a purple one on the end that was for the speed and the temperature. So we're gonna have to install our thermistor separately. I don't think the BBS02 has a thermistor in it, or at least this one doesn't, because this is 5 pins on that connector. So I need to get a knife so I can cut that silicone. Where's my knife? Alright, so I'm just gonna flip the controller this way right here so that I can get my knife down in here, and then we just want to cut not too deep. We just want to cut the silicone around this connector where we're going to need to disconnect it. So I just want to cut through that silicone with my knife right around the edges of the connector. You don't want to go too crazy with it, because there is a circuit board way down below there on the other side of this metal kind of bottom of the case that you can see right here. So there's a circuit board that this connector is plugging into underneath of it. There's also like a gasket, I think, that'll be in between this connector and the metal. So we're just cutting the edges of the silicone so that we can get in there. Now for this last cut, I'm gonna take this, get that out of the way, and then we can come down in here. I love how I can see what I'm doing on my phone screen as I'm filming. This is like the best GoPro improvement ever. All right, so once you have sufficiently got the silicone out from around that connector, make sure you're not grabbing any of the wires, but there's this little like lever thing right here that needs to be able to like depress. And I think I still have some silicone in there that's going to prevent me from doing that. So I need to make sure that that stuff gets out of there first, or this thing just isn't going to be able to depress like it needs to. Alright, so once you've cut some of the silicone out of the way, oops, and you can depress that little thing on this connector here. I don't know if you can see this, but I'm reaching in there with the pliers, and we're going to use the pliers to depress that little thing on the connector, and then pull it up and out of there. A little bit of wiggling. Okay, I'm gonna make sure we're still grabbing onto it. Pulling. Oh. Let's see here. There's some silicone resistance. You don't want to mess this connector up. I'm trying to preserve this. Oh, okay, there it is. So, it's just full of silicone. That's why it's so hard to get it out. And we're gonna wanna clean some of that off of this connector before we put it back in there. And at this point, it's kind of a good idea to just put it upside down and give it a little boop, 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 just so that maybe blow up inside of there just to get any chunks of silicone out. Because silicone can fall down through that little hole by this connector and down into the motor, and we don't want that. Alright, so now we've got, there's a 4-pin JST right here. That's for the pedal assist stuff. Alright, so that thing we just pulled out, that was a 1, 2, there's no, so this is a 6-pin connector, but it just doesn't have a wire going into that 6th slot. Interesting. So maybe this does have a thermistor in it, but just this connector doesn't have a wire that connects to it. Interesting. On the BBS HD, it had all 6 wires going in there connecting. So that's news to me. Now you don't have to get all of this silicone out. You just want to get it out so that you can get this connector unplugged and then plug it back in once we're done. I do want to take this apart a little bit more. We don't have to. So when you change your BBSH or your BBS02 to a different controller, like this is all that we really have to do, right? Is we have to disconnect the stock controller so that we have access to the pedal assist wiring, the hall sensor wiring, and then the phase wires, right? And then so if we wanted to use a different controller with this, we could just wire up the phase wires, the hall sensors, and then if we want pedal assist, we've got the pedal assist sensor stuff coming to this JST right here. So we could just hook all that up to a different controller, and that is what we're gonna do. But I wanna continue disassembling this BBS02 so that I can look inside of this other part and see the motor core, because I want to take a look inside there. As long as I have this thing open, I'm gonna take it all the way apart. Well, maybe not like all the way, but we're gonna take it apart further. And what we're gonna have to do is get this silicone off of these phase wires just by kind of scraping it off with something, just like we did that other connector. So I've got chunks of silicone that are coming up off of this green phase wire here. Oh. And like I said before, as you're doing this, it's not a bad idea to take it upside down and give it a little one of these and blow out those little silicone chunks, because we don't want it going down into the motor. Alright guys, so once we've removed enough silicone, I just kind of continued using my flathead to scrape along these phase wires and that silicone to get the silicone out of there. So now all of these phase wires, I've scraped the silicone, so they should be free enough so that, oops, looks like I f***ed up the insulation on the phase wire right there. We're gonna have to fix that. But it looks like we should be able to get this out the other side now. So let's get all that junk, silicone junk out of there one last time. Alright, so we're gonna go like this, spin this guy around for a second.
get my, let's see here, where is the right one? So this is a tiny one. So I'm gonna get my 3mm Allen, get it going into these bolts on the other side here, opposite the controller where we took those out. So get these bolts coming out. Are these the same length as these other ones? Yes, they are. It actually looks like there's 4 on here. It seems like my GoPro is struggling with this new feature that lets me see the preview while it's filming. It seems like it's overheating or something. So we're getting this 4th bolt out of here, and then we're gonna have to do the same thing on this side probably. We're gonna have to pry it a little bit to get this thing out. So same deal over here. First I'm just gonna make sure all the screws are definitely out. Yep. Alright, so same deal over here. We've got like this gasket that we wanna try and preserve it. So let's see. Can we get this little pick in here somewhere? I think this might be a paper gasket. This one is rubber that goes to the controller, but I think this might be the paper gasket. I don't know. Let's see, is there anywhere we can start prying a little bit? So this, let's see here. So this goes like this. So maybe, can we start prying down on the bottom here somewhere? Let's see. I don't know if we're gonna be able to open this part and keep this gasket. I really don't know. Let's see. Alright, so what I did here, guys, to get this started is I took the screwdriver and then just kind of put some pressure on it and pushed that paper gasket down and in a little bit right here. And then I just gave it a little bit of a pry, and then it started. So now that I've got it started in this one spot, see it coming out right there? Now that I've got it started right here, the whole thing is coming out. I'm gonna try and keep this paper gasket in one piece here. So I'm gonna go around the whole thing and try and disconnect the paper gasket and make sure that it's not like stuck. And it's hard, it can be hard to, it's just like you want to try your best, but chances are this thing will get messed up anyways. So just go around with a little spudger like this and let's try your best to separate that paper gasket so that we can maybe use it again. Alright, so I used some creative prying to kind of, use some creative prying to get this piece separated. And now I'm just kind of pulling, and it's the silicone from those phase wires that's tripping me up here, but they are going to come through one way or another. Just gotta get more of that silicone out of there. Oh, and there's like a little gasket or something. These things usually just get ripped, right? Like it's hard to maintain those little gaskets. So you might have to take that little grommet gasket thing out of there to get these wires through. So let's see here. So I'm pulling and ripping. There's another one. Just gonna throw it away. All right, so I got some more of that out. Oh, there we go. All right, so this whole thing is coming through, and I'm holding it upside down like this so those silicone pieces aren't getting pulled. You don't want a bunch of junk and debris in the inside of the O2 here, like in the core. So, oh man. So I don't think do these bullet connectors go through there? Yeah, okay. So let's get these through here. Oh, And then this phase wire I screwed up. Big time. Let's see here. I gotta pull, and we gotta go back on this other side, and I was able to pull this motor core off of here. You can see the paper gasket kind of got mangled. We'll have to get that, we'll have to scrape that off of there before I put this back together. So we got this part open. I mean, the paper gasket is still mostly intact. There's just a little bit of it where it kind of, a little layer of it peeled off, but not entirely. I'm gonna put this cover back on here. I'm not gonna screw it on yet. I'm just gonna put it on there so that I'm not worried about getting stuff in there and getting that grease all over the place. So now let's look in here. Let's get my GoPro so I can see what's going on. Alright guys, so here we are. So I've got this thing apart. Motor core is pulled out from this piece, the main motor housing. So just an observation here before we continue. So that moly grease definitely gets in on the nylon gear. I don't think that was from me pushing that red grease in here, because otherwise we would see red grease in here. I've been using this motor for quite some years, like two years probably, and you can see that that moly grease, it does kind of get down in there and then get on the teeth of this nylon gear. And so that is why some people take the SHC 100 and put that grease out here as well, is because if it migrates in there, I think the moly grease can degrade the nylon teeth. I'm kind of interested to see the nylon gear. I don't know if I'm gonna take that out or not. I'm just kind of looking at it. Oh! This popped off. We gotta get that back on there. Now what I would like to do is I want to pull this rotor, this thing here with this gear that's sticking up. See? So this is the rotor, and it seems like it should be easier to pull this one than like a big hub motor rotor where you would need like a gear puller. I don't know if I'm gonna need a gear puller for this. I'm just gonna grab onto it, my rag here, and just... Alright guys, so I'm gonna fix a little mistake that I made while I was opening the motor up. You can see that the insulation for this green phase wire came off when I was taking this part of the motor core out, and it was coming through these holes here with those little gaskets. So we ripped a little bit of the insulation off of that wire. All the wires are still intact, just some of the green insulation came off. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to take some heat shrink and get the heat shrink, get that going through hopefully, and it's a little bit of finagling. Oh, there we go. So get that down here, and then make sure that we get that heat shrink nice and pushed down as far as we can. Okay. That was maybe a little bit more heat shrink than necessary, but alright, so we fixed up that little boo-boo there where the insulation got ripped off that phase wire. we just wanted to cover that up and insulate that with some heat shrink so that it doesn't touch anything else that is metal and have one of our phase wires shorting out on something else. So I took this circuit board with the Hall sensors and I took it off of here. So there were some screws and I unscrewed them because I wanted to look at the bottom of this. So in the BBS HD, the thermistor was the furthest. It was that 6th pin over on the right here. Let's see if I can get it in the screen. So on the BBS HD, the thermistor was that 6th pin, but if I flip this thing around and we look at that 6th pin on the circuit board, there's no trace going anywhere. So I don't think that, and then you can see the second trace over here, that isn't connected either. So the thermistor on the BBS HD, it was that 6th pin, so it doesn't seem like that is connected to anything. And I don't think that this BBS02 has any kind of a temperature sensor inside of it, because that's not connected to anything. Right, so I think we need to put a thermistor in the motor, and I'm gonna have to solder it on. I want to get the thermistor down in the motor somewhere in between the windings, but oh my goodness, guys, so I just pulled out the rotor by hand. So it's a lot easier to get these smaller rotors out on like this BBS02 mid-drive than it is on like a hub motor. But I basically, like, I put my rag on this gear and just got like a really good grip on it, as much of my hand as I could get on there with the rag. And then I was just kind of like working it back and forth gently. You don't want to damage any of the magnets or anything as you're pulling it out. And there's better ways to get it out with like leverage, and some guy used like wood clamps and a bunch of pieces of wood. But basically what I did is this, I grabbed onto it really good, and I was holding on to the other piece over here with my other hand, and I was pulling this downwards and pulling that piece the opposite direction and just kind of wiggling it back and forth gently, just a little bit, because it's got this bearing stuck on the end of it that presses down in there, and that is what this whole thing was kind of like stuck on, right? Was this bearing that is pressed down into the opposite side of the motor housing. But the reason that I took the rotor out, and we want to keep those magnets away from anything metal, we don't want metal anything getting on here, because it's kind of annoying to get off the magnets. So we're just gonna put this stuff somewhere else for safekeeping for now, and then we're gonna focus our attention back here. Now, so like I said before, this Hall sensor board, it was bolted on there. Alright guys, so I'm gonna pop this little thing off of here and then take a look at this nylon gear inside of here. Might need an impact to get these screws out. You don't want to strip them. They're usually in there pretty good. Okay. Now, we can take a couple of these screws from the case, and then you screw those. What's this? Is that a piece of, what is that? Looks like a piece of paint or something. So we'll screw these two screws into these little holes here. Oops. Let's see here. Can we, where's my... So we can screw these two screws in here, and then once we get that we can kind of use those screws to pull up this little cover plate thing. Oh, oh, oh. Here we go. Alright. So there's the nylon gear inside of here. Let's pop. Oh, it's got a snap ring on it. I'll have to get a snap ring pliers. Okay, so we got that snap ring off, and then once you get the snap ring off of there, you should be able to just kind of grab this gear out. We can maybe wiggle it around. I'm wiggling it back and forth like this, and then pulling on the bottom of it. Oh, there it comes. Helps to get it upside down a little bit, but then it comes out like this. Okay. So we're taking a look at it. It's got some goobers on it. Is that molly grease? What is that? Huh. There might be something else. I'll try and get a look at it at the camera. Might be something else. I don't know. So I guess maybe that is what's all over this nylon gear. So it looks like there's a snap ring down in here as well. Actually, it does look like... Oh wow, yeah, see over here, you can see all this grease got like spread along the edge here. Look at this. So that's the molly grease, and it came in through here. I can see it down here. So the molly grease got in here. Alright guys, so my GoPro keeps going dead, but right here we can see that the molly grease was definitely coming in through here. You can see it down in here. That's molly grease coming inside of this, down onto this big nylon gear, getting all in the teeth of the nylon gear, and you can see it got mixed up with the white lithium grease. So I'm gonna clean off this gear, get all this stuff off, clean all this white lithium grease and the molly grease out of here, and then put that... Alright guys, so I took that nylon gear out of there. I got all of the white lithium grease out of there. My snap ring pliers that I have with me right now, like I can't get down there because it's got the 90-degree snap ring tips on it right now, and you just need some straight ones that can get down in there. So I'm not going to remove that snap ring down in there right now. But that is how you would get this gear out of here, I think. Maybe not, I don't know. But I'm gonna take some of this grease, some of the Molith SHC 100, and we're gonna put this down into here. Well, let's get it on this guy first. We're gonna get this grease on the teeth of my nylon gear that I've cleaned off. Kind of smushing it down in there as we go along here. Alright. And then I'm just gonna grease up this spray clutch inside of this guy just a little bit. Doesn't need much in there. Just with what I have left on my little stick here. Alright, so there we go. Now, which way did this guy go back in there? I think it was this way. Is it not? I think that should be right. So let's get that nylon gear back down in here. Is it going? Is that... Oh, there we go. There we go. And then we've got our snap ring that we can put on there to get that back attached. Okay. Alright guys, so what I'm noticing about the controller on my BBS02 here is it's got a 6-pin connector on it that you can see right here. However, there's only 5 wires connected to it. That 6th spot that usually goes into the... in the BBS HD, it's a thermistor, and then it's some kind of a sensor. But on my BBS HD, that is what I was reading the thermistor reading from, the temperature. But there's no wire hooked up to it on this connector. So I can't do it how I did it with my BBS HD. So we're gonna have to, and then, so additionally, so this connector doesn't have that 6th wire in there, right? So that's kind of an issue. But then I was looking at the motor a little bit more closely, right? So I've taken the rotor, I pulled that out of the stator. So we've just got the guts of the motor right here, the motor core. And so I took out this Hall sensor board, and so it has some screws in it that I already took out. These big long guys, these long boys. So these guys go down in here, right? Hold this thing on there. Right, so one goes right there, one goes right here, one goes right here, and they go through there like that. I took all those guys out, right? And then, so there's 3 hall sensors on this thing. I gotta pull this GoPro off my head so I can see what I'm filming here. So there's 3 hall sensors on this hall sensors circuit board. So there's hall 1, hall 2, hall 3. So they're those little things, you can see them right here sticking down in between the magnets there. That's the hall sensor with the 3 little, you can see there's like 3 green wires going down in there. But then there's also a little hall sensor down in there. So you want to, when you take the screws out of this thing, this hall sensor board, you just want to pull it up gently. It's stuck, it'll still be stuck in, just the halls are kind of stuck down in there. So you want to kind of pull those out gently. You don't want to be pulling this thing too crazy, so just pull right at those holes until they come out, right? So if we flip this thing over, you can see those little hall sensors. So that's what they look like. They're just those little guys. So those are the 3 hall sensors that stick down in between the magnets. And I don't know if you can tell, but there's like a little groove in the magnet where the hall sensor actually can go and fit in between those magnets. It's gonna be hard to show you like on the camera at all, but there's like a little notch, a little opening in a couple of the magnets where the hall sensors go between, right? So there's a specific spot where all of this stuff needs to hook in. Those hall sensors need to go in there into those little notches in the magnets. And you want the hall sensors in a certain orientation, right? Like you got to put them back in the same spot, right? But anyway, so I was looking at the bottom of this circuit board, and it doesn't seem like there's anything connected to that 6th pin. So I don't think there's any ambient temperature sensor in this thing, right? Because on the controller, it didn't even have a 6th wire on there hooking into that pin. And then on the bottom of this PCB, that pin, it doesn't seem like there's a trace there. So I'm wondering, and I'm not like an expert with this stuff, but this is a thermistor, right? Like you can buy thermistors, so I've got another 2 of them in here. New ones. These are 10K thermistors that I got from Grant, and they're like a couple bucks each. Alright guys, so I'm looking at the bottom of the hall sensor circuit board for the O2, the BBS02. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to solder a 10K thermistor onto these guys, if it'll focus. So it's like one of the wires is going to be soldered to this spot on the very end. So that's where the thermistor signal goes through this connector, right? And then the other wire is going to be soldered to this other spot right here. That's the ground, or like the black wire going to the controller, right? So when I get done soldering, it's going to look something like this. These wires are just extremely tiny, and I can barely, I'm not going to be able to film soldering this at all. But it needs to look like this when it gets done. Focus. It's going to look like this when it gets done, with those wires soldered right there. Right? So I'm going to get this thermistor soldered onto that circuit board, and then we can get the circuit board going back on here, and then I'm going to glue that thermistor down in the windings so that it gets a good temperature reading right on the windings. So I'm going to get this soldered up. Alright, so I've soldered one of the wires on of this thermistor to that spot on the top there on the screen, and then so now I've got to solder this other wire on kind of right like that. So I'll do that next. Alright guys, so I've got my 10K MTC thermistor soldered onto this BBS02 Hall sensor circuit board. So that's where I've got it soldered on there. So I'm gonna flip this guy upside down again, and then it's gonna go back in there like it did before, right? I gotta get this GoPro back in my head. Alright guys, so here we are back at the BBS02. And there's still got the rotor out, right? So we're looking down at the stator of the motor core. And so here I've got the PCB going back in there. And here's my thermistor that's soldered on there now, and it's sticking off of that PCB. So when you put the PCB back on here, make sure that it's got that little piece of paper underneath of it, in between the PCB and like the windings and the phase wires and stuff. So now what I need to do is I'm going to get this thermistor down into the windings, like the copper windings that are going around the stator magnets. And we're going to get this thermistor glued in there. Alright, so we're going to use thermal glue. I got this on Amazon. It's just this little tiny thing of thermal glue. So you want some kind of a glue that's going to be able to transmit heat between the windings of the motor and your thermistor, right? You don't want to use some kind of glue that can't transfer heat well. So that's why we have the thermal glue. So this is, I'll get this GoPro on my head and try and film this. Okay, so this is going to be very difficult to see, but if you can see this white blob where my pinky finger is pointing, see that white blob? So I've started to put some thermal glue, and then you can kind of see the light, and then so right here you can see the thermistor down in the windings, like in between there, by this white blob. So look down in between those magnets. So that's where I have the thermistor. I'm going to glue it in there with this glue. I'm just going to get a whole bunch of this white glue and just glue it in there so it doesn't move. So I'm going to do that, and then I'll probably have to let it sit overnight or whatever so that it'll set. But I'm going to get that glued in there the best that I can. Alright, so there it is, the final product. I just kind of put a whole bunch of glue and got it down in. Alright guys, so there it is. You see that big white blob going down between there? That's kind of where I've got my thermistor running, and then it's got that thermal glue holding it in. So I'm just going to leave that overnight to set, make sure that that is setting in there right. Alright guys, so it's a new day. It's a new me. I've had some coffee, feeling fresh, so we're getting back to work on this thing. Alright, so I've got the motor here. I let the glue dry, so where we last left off, I had the glue drying, and I had the thermistor that I had installed into the windings on the other side of the motor. So there, I have a thermistor, that's a temperature sensor, that I've installed in the motor windings with some thermal glue. So I let that dry, right, and then so that involved soldering that thermistor onto the circuit board. That was the Hall sensor circuit board, right? So I made sure that that all works. I put all this back together. I connected it back to the stock display and the 52 volt battery, and I turned it on, and I made sure that it's still running. Everything seems like it's still good, so my solder job on that PCB should be working. The thermistor is installed in the motor windings. It's able to spin. Nothing is getting in the way or obstructing the spinning of the motor. So right now what we're going to start doing is I'm going to make a wiring harness. So we need to be able to connect the BBS02, we want to connect our motor to a different controller, right? So this is the stock controller that comes as part of the BBS02, right? So I've got this thing removed. And so we're going to kind of try and replicate what we see here. So this is a 6-pin JST. I think they're called XH. Now, I think this one is a little bit different because it has this locking thing on it where you push this little thing and it's got this like locking latch on it. So I don't know what those connectors are called. I couldn't find those on Amazon. But what I did find on Amazon that's very close is these things. So these are XH 2.54 millimeter connectors, and we want the 6P connector, right, with the 6 slots in it. And so this particular kit, it comes with these wires that are pre-crimped. Right, so the way that these connectors work is you gotta have your wire, right? I think this is like a, what is this, like a 22 gauge wire or something? Just a tiny wire that go into these. But then it's got this little thing that you crimp onto the end of it. And once you push this wire down into this thing, it just kind of locks in there. Right? So it kind of locks in there. So what we want to do is we're going to gather some wires that kind of resemble the same colors as this connector here, and then we're going to make one that's almost identical. So we need a red wire, right? We need a black wire. So let's grab the black one out. We'll get that one ready. Okay. So we're just going to have to use the colors that we have that came in this kit. I don't have a gray colored wire, and then I need another wire for the 6th wire that I want to put in here. So let's get this thing started. So we can see, we gotta make sure these wires are going in the same order as this other one to kind of maintain that color coding for the wires that we can. So we can see over here, the red, it goes red, and then the black wire. So let's start out with that, right? So we make sure we're looking at it the right way. So I want my red wire to go in here. Alright, so we just push this thing in. And then that connects down in there. And it should stay in there, right? So now I've got one of our little wires in there. So now let's get the black one next. We're going to take this one, same thing. Push it down in here. And there we go. So now we have this little 6-pin connector guy all ready to go here, right? So we've got our 6-pin connector all ready to go. So that's going to be part of our wiring harness. Okay. So we got our 6-pin JST XH 2.54 millimeter connector ready to go here. So that is great. Let's move on to the next step of making this wiring harness. Alright guys, we're back. So what I'm going to do now is I've got this motor cable, and what I want to do is I want to turn this motor cable into a wiring harness for this controller. So this motor cable is going to be coming up in here, and then we're going to connect the phase wires from the motor cable to the phase wires of the motor. And then so there's a bunch of little wires, and those wires need to connect to this 6-pin JST connector, and then we'll plug that in to the Hall sensor PCB over there, right? So this will be part of our wiring harness as well. That's hooked up, whoops, that's hooked up to this motor cable. So we'll set that aside for now. So what I'm gonna do here is, there's, on the end of this motor cable, looks like this. So each of these pins inside of here have a specific meaning, right? And they need to be wired to the right thing in our motor. So for the phase wires, so what we want to do here is this, we want to make sure that all of these wires, the colors of these wires, are connected to the right pins in this motor cable. Now you shouldn't have to do this, but I bought this motor cable on AliExpress, and it's just some like weird off-brand thing. If you have a motor cable that's Joulet, that's like a good brand, but this is off-brand, so like we gotta verify this. So I got my multimeter. We're gonna put it in continuity mode, the little Wi-Fi symbol, right? And so what continuity mode does is we can use our probes. So let's see here. So if I touch, right, so we can hear that beeping. So that means that that green phase wire that I'm touching down here with my red probe is correctly wired up to where it should be in there. So it's not a bad idea to make sure that some of these pins are like wired up to the right thing. So in particular, I think it's hard to mess up most of this stuff, but I just want to make sure that the thermistor is going to be going to the right spot. So let's see here. So I am going to hold this like this, and then we're just gonna, I gotta hold this like this, and then hold on to my mouse. You guys aren't gonna be able to see this. It's just like crazy. Okay. So I just checked the continuity on that gray wire, and it does seem like it's in the right spot, and it's wired up the same way that Grin wires theirs up. So I checked a couple of them. That's good enough for me. It seems like the motor cable is wired up how I expect it to be. You just want to double check that, or else you could wire all this stuff up and get it into the motor, and then like something weird might be happening, and it would be very confusing. Alright, so we verified that. Let's get my phone out of the way here. Alright, so what we're going to do is we got to take our knife, and we're going to strip the insulation on this motor cable a little bit here, a little bit further, so we can get in at these wires. So I'm just going to take a blade here and kind of, so usually you can just kind of score the insulation. You don't have to like cut all the way through it. So I'm just going to score it so we've got a good amount here, or we can split this out. So then I did like I scored it down like this, and then I'm just going to score it around there. And then we should be able to get it started coming off up here. Pliers can work good for this. And then we just kind of split it open like this. Alright guys, so we're making this wiring harness. I stripped some of this insulation off. I scored the outside of the motor cable with this blade. You don't have to cut all the way through the insulation. You can just score it and then just kind of rip it, and it comes off like that. So now we've got all of our wires exposed in here. So the easiest ones to start with is the big one. First thing we're going to do here, guys, is get some connectors on the phase wires of this thing. Right, so you've got the green, yellow, and blue phase wires. So I've pulled out some connectors here. So these are bullet connectors. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to put the female bullet connector with the hole that this male connector plugs into. We're going to put this female one on these wires. It's a little bit tricky to get the wires going in there. I'm using these 16 to 14 gauge connectors because these wires, they seemed more like a 10 or 12. Alright guys, so I wanted to kind of show all the steps of this, but my GoPro keeps overheating, and this is just, I stripped this wire, this phase wire. Now we're making the phase wire go into this bullet connector, this female bullet connector, pushing that phase wire in there as far as it'll go. And then I use my crimpers on the blue mode, and we come in here and crimp that baby down. Oh! Right, so now we got our phase wires crimped. And then these connectors have heat shrink on them too, so I can hit these with a heat gun and it'll shrink this bottom part onto the wire. So, you know what else is dealing with some heat right now is my GoPro. Guys, so the next step is I want these connectors, like these gotta match, right? So these connectors that I've put on the end of my wiring harness here, they need to match with these connectors inside of the motor, because these Chinese connectors that we got here, they're not the same, right? So we're gonna get these off of here, and all I'm gonna do is take my cable cutters or wire cutters or whatever you want to call them, and then just cut the bottom of these off so that we've just got the bare wires. We don't need those connectors anymore. And then we'll straighten these wires out a little bit. Alright, so just stripping the insulation off of these other phase wires inside of the motor. So we're just using our wire strippers to get like the bottom 1/4 of an inch stripped off of these, and it seems like these ones are fitting onto the 14 to 12 gauge thing in my wire strippers here. So let's keep going with that. I think these might be metric wires and they don't exactly line up with these like American wire gauge things, so you just got to be careful when you're using that kind of stuff on metric wires. So alright, alright, so we got those connectors crimped on there. Let's blast them with the heat gun, shrink that on. Okay, so now I've got those connectors soldered onto the phase wires how we want them. Alright, so those are the phase wires, so we should be able to connect these bullet connectors to where they need to go now. So let's continue on with our wiring harness. We got to connect the rest of these guys to our little JST thing here that we made earlier. So let's move on with that. Alright boys, so I'm just starting to solder these connectors together. So we're connecting the wires from my motor cable over to this JST connector. Let's wait to solder on this bitch. Alright guys, so if you're trying to follow along, this is important. So remember how we put this green wire in that 6th pin of this JST connector that goes into the BBS02. So that 6th pin should be the thermistor that I glued in there, right? So on the L10 connector, it's the gray wire, that's the thermistor, and I already checked the continuity of that wire, so it's wired up right. So I'm gonna solder this gray wire onto this green wire so that our speed signal is coming through this connector in and through the L10 connector correctly. So I'll solder this gray wire from the cable to this green wire that we put on here in the 6th spot with our speed, or with our temperature sensor. Alright guys, so I'm just looking at my video where I did this in the BBS HD to remember which colors are which. So it seems like we want our yellow phase wire, or our yellow hall sensor wire, to connect to what should have been the gray wire on this connector, but I used a blue wire. So if that makes any sense, we're going to connect this yellow wire to this blue wire. So then the only thing I have left is that white wire, and that's going to the speed once I get that. Alright guys, so here's how the wiring harness looks at the end of everything. So here's all of my wires coming out of the 6-pin connector. They're connected over here to the L10 motor cable. So I've got so the red goes to red, black goes to black. I've got the yellow wire coming from the 6-pin connector going to the blue hall sensor. I've got the white wire from the 6-pin connector going to the green hall sensor. I've got the blue wire from this sensor coming over to the yellow hall sensor. So everything is connected here except for this white wire. So that's the speed signal. So I'm going to hook this up to a speed sensor eventually. I don't have it right now. It's coming in the mail. But this is where we're going to hook the speed signal up to, or the speed sensor up to eventually, is this white wire and then the black ground wire. But for now, this is good enough to get things going. So here's another look at it now that everything is said and done. Alright, so I've got a different cover that we're going to use this time around. So this is just an empty cover. This is the housing for the controller, but there's no controller inside of it. Alright, so this is where all of these wires are going to get tucked. We're going to connect these wires and that harness into the motor. And then this thing kind of covers up all of our wires. And then our controller isn't going to be in here in the motor, it's going to be up on our bike. And we're going to use the Phaserunner controller, right? So now it's just a matter of getting all these wires connected and tucked into here, and then getting it all put back together. And then we can start hooking it up to, we can get the Phaserunner and the Cycle Analyst and all that stuff on the bike. Get everything hooked up, get a battery on there, and then we can try this thing out. Alright, so first I'm going to plug in the 6-pin thing. This is kind of like the most delicate one. So we're just going to plug that one down into there. It doesn't have that little locking thing like the one that comes on the controller, so we're just gonna have to push it down in there. Man, this thing is crazy. We're just gonna have to push it down in there and get it connected. So that connected in there nicely. I actually, I don't think I'm gonna glue it in there because it would make it difficult to get out in the future. It would make it really difficult. So we're just gonna leave that. That's gonna be a little bit more like delicate and sensitive than the stock one. Like you don't want to yank on these wires or anything. So, because those little connectors are delicate. But so it's connected, it's in there. Now we gotta figure out how can we get these. Where are we gonna loop all these wires? These wires are really long, like longer than required. So I guess we're just gonna like loop these guys. I should have shortened them really. We're gonna loop these guys like back, I don't know, like this way I guess. So I'm gonna put this cover back on here for now so that we don't get grease all over things as we're working here. So now let's see. So let's plug in this blue phase wire to our bullet connector that we set up. Okay, and then so we'll connect the yellow phase wire. Alright. And then we will connect the green phase wire. Ooh. Okay. So that should be all connected. Now we gotta figure out how can we finagle these wires to fit in here gracefully. Can that wire cable even fit through that hole? Let's see. Get this cover off because you gotta take that off to get the controller back on. So I guess I'm just gonna get this thing started going on here, and then we're gonna flip this. We're gonna have to poke these wires in kind of as we go. So let's see. I don't think there's anything in the way, is there? Like, alright, so I think we're just gonna screw this puppy on. I don't think there's anything in the way. So, alright, so then we're just gonna put this cap back on and get all those screws going back into it. Alright, so there it is, guys. We got this plastic cover back on there. Everything is put back together. Our BBS02 now has an L10 motor connector cable instead of a bunch of these other things coming out of it from the stock controller. So we removed that stock controller, made our own wiring harness. It's got this L10 motor cable coming out of the motor now. So we can connect that thing to a Phaserunner controller. So I'm gonna go get the bike, get the motor back out by the bike, get my Cycle Analyst and the Phaserunner controller, and let's start hooking all that stuff up on the bike. So I had a long day today of wiring this thing up, so we've got that wiring harness that we made, and we wired into the BBS02 motor. It's coming out. So then I've got it routed. It's coming out of the motor, and then I've got it routed coming up. So as you can see here, I've got the L10 motor cable coming out of the motor, and it's coming up, and then underneath this 3-bolt bracket, where these two bolts go into the motor. So it's kind of up through there, underneath here. And then it comes out right here, goes up here, and then there is the connector, right? Right, so then I've got that motor cable and it's coming up the bike. I've got the Phaserunner up here. It's underneath the top tube. I just mounted it here because it's just kind of like the easiest place to route the length of this motor cable up to the controller, where it's all kind of nice and tucked away and cleanly. So controller's here, battery's here. We got the motor connected to the controller with our L10 wiring harness. Battery's all hooked up. I got the Phaserunner turned on. I got the Cycle Analyst up on the bars. But the first thing I want to do is come down to my computer. So I've connected my USB cable to the Phaserunner. And we're just down here on my computer and we're going to program this thing. So what I'm going to do is we're going to load default parameters. I'm going to Bafang. I guess we'll just go to BBS02 because there doesn't appear to be an option for the O2 in here. And then I'll go to V6 Phaserunner L10 with CA3 for the controller type, and then hit apply. So I'm just looking up on the internet how we want to configure the BBS02 in the Phaserunner suite. Hey everyone, so at this point, I'd like to thank everyone for watching this far. This turned into a really long video. I gotta cut this one here. This turned really long. It's 1:37 in the morning. I've been doing this all day. I got the motor on the bike, it's hooked up to the Cycle Analyst, the battery's on there, everything's on there. I just need to program the Phaserunner for BBS02 now. I fiddled around with it for a little bit earlier today, and I was running into all the same problems I did on the BBS HD. So I dinked around with it for a while. I need to go back to it tomorrow with a clear head, if you know what I mean, right? But I would appreciate it. Look at this. So this is what I need to show you here. Look at this. I need you to like and subscribe to the e-bike builder channel. I would appreciate that if you watch this far. Look at this. Look at all of this editing. And guys, I'm sorry I can't edit it down more and do it even better, but like, this is just all the time that I have for editing this one video. Right? So look at all this. It's a lot of work down here. So I would appreciate it if you like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. We're getting this BBS02 on 72 volts. We're gonna do it. We're gonna get it going. It's gonna be sweet. So like and subscribe, boys. I'll see you guys next time. We're gonna program this thing, get the Phaserunner set up for the BBS02. It's gonna be awesome. So stay tuned, guys. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. Peace out.